Hello, I'm Dave Grossi. They've been called America's greatest generation. Young men, some as young as 15, who put aside the most formative years of their life to help defend freedom during World War II. Years that should have been spent going to baseball games, attending college, going out on dates, but instead they willingly put their lives on hold, put on a uniform, left their cities and towns for parts unknown, in essence saved America from the tyranny that was spreading across Europe and that had indeed come home on December 7th, 1941. This is their story. The Department of Veterans Affairs estimates that there are fewer than 1 million World War II vets still alive out of the 16 million that served during the war. And the VA also estimates that well over 400 die every day, and that by 2036 there will be no World War II vets left. You're going to meet some of these incredible people now. Listen as Staff Sergeant Bill Pace, a Purple Heart recipient, recalls his story about how he was forced to bail out of a B-17 bomber 5 miles up over Germany when his plane was struck, and then how he spent the last few months of the war in 2 POW camps in Germany. And Army PFC Lloyd Roush, who helped liberate the infamous Dachau concentration camp, and Staff Sergeant Mario Grossi, who helped liberate the notorious Woblin concentration camp. They'll describe for you the horrors, the sights, the smells that only a veteran who's been there and done that can describe. Army hero Tech Sergeant George West, recipient of the Silver Star for Gallantry, and he'll relate how his citation calls what he became a one-man patrol when his unit was almost wiped out in Germany. You'll be spellbound by Navy veteran Vic Bucket, one of only a handful of survivors of the USS Indianapolis that was torpedoed by a Japanese sub during a top-secret mission, delivering the components of the atomic bomb that helped end the war in Japan. He'll describe for you his experiences during his struggle for survival over 4 days in shark-infested waters, watching as over 600 of his crewmates drowned or were eaten alive by sharks when their ship's distress signals were ignored. Their stories will undoubtedly invoke many emotions: pride, sorrow, even anger. But as our film progresses, I'm convinced that those emotions will compel you to watch and listen. For several of these vets, it's the very first time they've related their wartime experiences, but they've all agreed to be part of this most important historical and educational project. Hear now as these heroes tell their stories of their years spent in Europe, the Pacific, or in critical duties stateside. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bonita Springs Historical Society is proud to present Bonita's Greatest Generation in their own words.
Okay, my name is Mario Grossi. I served in the U.S. Army, and I was in the European Theater under George Patton, 3rd Army, 8th Infantry Division, and I was discharged, honorably discharged as a staff sergeant, and fortunate to come back without a scratch. At that time, I was 19 years old, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, and usually on a Sunday afternoon, we used to get together in an abandoned cafe and play poker. So I was playing poker when it happened, and somebody came in and said Pearl Harbor was bombed, and we said, no kidding, we're at war? Well, we're going to war. So we quit playing poker, we came out, and everybody was just walking around wondering what's going to happen, what we're going to be doing. And at that time, we each went our own way. We didn't think any more about it, so. Probably about 3 months after the Pearl Harbor was hit, we got a notice from the Bureau of Draftees that we were going to be drafted. And we were asked to go to the federal building on Fitchell Street to get our draft notice. So we went there, got our draft notice, and it said that you're going to be drafted and you'll be called. And soon, about 2 months later, we were called, and I was drafted and I was shipped to Fort Niagara, and that was where we first were stationed at Fort Niagara. And from Fort Niagara, we were going to be disbanded to different units. And at that time, I was asked to go to Gulfport, Mississippi, and I was going to be a medics in the Army Air Corps. At that time, the Air Corps was not a separate unit. It was attached to the Army. So I was going to be a medic in the Army Air Corps down in Mississippi. So when I was down there for 2 or 3 weeks, I was called from the CO, and he said that you're going to be transferred to Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah. You're still going to be in the medics, but you're not going to be in the Air Corps. It's going to be a separate medical unit. So I was transferred to Salt Lake City, Utah. And about a month after that, I was called into the CO, and they said, we understand that you used to race and train homing pigeons. I says, yes, that was my hobby. I used to raise them, train them. He says, well, we're going to start a pigeon corps down in California, and we need people like you to train these birds. We may use them in European theater. So I was transferred to Bakersfield, California, and at that time they set up different lofts. The loft held about 100 pigeons. We had 4 or 5 lofts throughout the area, and they shipped in the pigeons. And at that time we had to breed them, make sure that the youngsters were born at that loft, because you couldn't fly the old ones. The old ones that they shipped us, if we let them go, they would try to go back to where they came from. So we separated those from the youngsters, and we start training the offsprings to fly different distance. We would start them maybe just to let them loose around the loft for a couple of weeks, and then maybe a month later we would take them 100 miles away, and then 6 months later we would take them 200 or 300 miles away. So I had one bird that he flew 450 miles, and he did come back to the loft, and we thought that was a pretty big thing. So we stayed there about 1.5 years at Bakersfield, California. And when the war was moving on and they were starting to organize for the invasion of Normandy, so they says, we're going to pack you up. So it says, we're not going to take any birds. We're going to pack you up. All the training that you had, we're going to England. So we were transferred to Southampton, England. And at that time they said that the war was going too fast. So we're going to take the lofts away from you, the carbine away from you. We're going to give you an F1, and you're now in the infantry. So we were engaged to replace Patton's Third Army. So from Southampton, England, we went into to Normandy, and I landed into it wasn't Utah. It was not Utah, but Omaha Beach, and we were shipped over, climbed out of the barges into the landing barges, and it was about 2 weeks after the invasion, and we landed into Normandy, and from Normandy we marched up to the hill, and when I got up to the hill, the sergeant says, okay, drop your raincoats, we're staying here tonight. And at that time, the mud was at least up to my ankles, and we said, is he kidding? He says, no, we'll lay your raincoats down. You're going to lay down here for a couple hours, and then we're going to move on. And so at that time, I started to cry. I said, I realized that we were in the Army. And we stayed there, and about 2 or 3 hours later, they says, pack up. They had the 2.5-ton trucks. So they loaded us onto the trucks, and from the hill, we went into St. Lo. And when we were going into St. Lo, it was unbelievable. There wasn't 2 bricks standing up. There wasn't a road. They had to have a bulldozer make a path for our 2.5-ton trucks to go through St. Lo. It was total destruction. And we realized at that time what the bombings were doing. So from St. Lo on, I can't remember every place we went because Patton was trying to move too fast to get to the Battle of the Bulge. He was told that he could make it in a certain amount of time. So he says he's going to make it. So from that place, we went on from St. Lo, we went into all through France. From France, I went into Belgium. From Belgium, I went into Holland. And from Holland, I went into Luxembourg. And from Luxembourg, we went into Germany. And as we were making these routes through there, I got into Liège, Belgium, and we were going in to relieve the Bastogne project at that time. And we were pushed back by the Germans. That was called the Battle of the Bulge. They pushed us back because they wanted to get into Antwerp. And we were disbanded. And so myself and 2 other fellows, we went into a Belgian farmhouse in Liège. And this master says, the Liège farmer said, coming. And he put us down into the barn. First he put us into the barn. He says, the boss is coming. So he says, we're going to put you down in the cellar. So he put us down into the potato cellar. The 3 of us there were 2.5 days. And at that time, this is quiet. And we had some chocolate bars that we were using, K-rashes and chocolate bars. And he gave us some food. And we stayed there for 3 days. He finally came in and says, coming, Americani's coming back. So we went out. The Germans were pushed back, and my 8th Infantry Division was coming into, so we joined our troops back at that time. And from that time, we went across the Elbe River. We met the Russians, and we were asked not to go any further. We stopped when we crossed the Elbe River and met the Russians. Well, this was before we entered into the Battle of the Bulge. At that time, we were still in Belgium, either Luxembourg or Belgium, right on the border anyway, before we were asked to go into, to relieve the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans were surrendering from the Russians. They were coming so fast from the Eastern Front to the Western Front, they wanted to get away from the Russians. So this major came up with 2 or 3 men, and he says, Americani. And at that time I was a sergeant, and I had 2 or 3 men with me, and they says, we want to surrender. He spoke fairly good English. And we says, well, okay, so he says he wants the ranking officer. So I says, I am the ranking officer. So at that time he gave me his Luger, and I asked him to have his 3 or 4 men leave their rifles down. And I asked one of my, either a PFC or a private, to take the major and the other soldiers back for questioning. So he took them back, and at that time I took the Luger, and I went to my captain and I said, sir, this major surrendered us. And he gave me the Luger. I sent him back to be questioned to the division headquarters. So I want to turn the gun, and then he says, Mario, he says, you keep the gun. He says, as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you a certificate so you can take it back to the States when the war is over. So he gave me a certificate saying that the gun was handed over to me. He signed it and says, no military use he can take it back. So I brought the Luger back with the certificate. And actually, the reason why he surrendered, not because we captured him, they were trying to get away from the Russians. When we were traveling through France, Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg, we were always in a tent or a pup tent or in a truck. When we got into Germany, they said that they liberated some German homes, and we were allowed to stay and shower in some German homes. So when I was in this home with 2 or 3 of my other buddies, it was a very nice home, a very big place. The room I had a desk. So when I went into the desk, I found a 35 millimeter camera, a magnifying glass, and a knife. So I took the 3 items, and the camera, there was also a box of film, 35 millimeter film. So I tried it, and it worked. So I kept that camera for the rest of the time that we were going through Germany. And when we liberated this concentration camp in Germany, I took the pictures of different places that I saw where they were either being thrown into a hole, or they were sleeping in a wire bunk, and then they were starving to death. So I took quite a few pictures of them, which I have copies of here now. And I kept those. And when I came back to the States, I had copies made. And when we got into, when I moved from Rochester to Naples, there was a German place, there was a Jewish place that was setting up the Holocaust. So I went in and I says, I'd like to donate a copy of these concentration camp films to you. So I gave it to them, and they had me sign a paper saying that they didn't pay for them, that was volunteer. So they said, can we have them? I said, that's your copy. I have my own copy back here. What I was seeing was unbelievable. I couldn't believe my eyes, the condition of the way these prisoners were. They weren't all Jewish prisoners. Some of them were political prisoners, and some were Jewish prisoners. But what they did is they used these people to do repair work from the bombs. And when they couldn't work anymore, they just starved them. They didn't feed them. They starved them. They died. They threw them in a hole, and another batch would come in, and it was just unbelievable. So what we saw was a major general. He didn't believe what he saw, so we were about 3 miles from the town. So he went into the town, and he had some of the townspeople come in to see what the camp was like. When they were walking through, they had handkerchiefs and scarves to their nose. They couldn't believe the stench. And they said that they didn't know this was happening. They said, we couldn't believe this was happening. We had no idea. And we knew that they could smell the smoke and the stench, but they just couldn't do anything about it. So that they accepted it. And those are memories that I can never forget. I can think back again of the things that I saw, and it was just, you wouldn't believe that a human being could do this to another human being. So I try to get it out of my mind. As a rule, you remember as a kid, I never talked about the war at all when you kids were youngsters. The only time I started saying something about this was when you were older and you were married, and I looked back at some of these pictures, and then I realized that it is something that I never want to see again. That's all I can tell you about it. When we heard the war had ended, we had crossed the Eb River and met the Russians. And we were told to stop there. And about 2 or 3 weeks. That's the only time that we were at a unit had stopped for a long period of time. Usually it was 1 or 2 night affairs, but 2 or 3 weeks we were there, and they said that the war has ended in Europe. And they said, we're going to pick up points. The people that had the most points were going to be transferred back to the States. If you didn't have enough points to be discharged, you were going to be organized to go over to Pacific. So I didn't have enough points to be discharged, so I was ready to go to the Pacific. And we were heading back to get organized for the units to either ship over, fly over, or go over by boat. And we at that time we heard that Truman had dropped the atom bomb, and we were very pleased at that because we knew that we weren't going to go over to the Pacific. So from that point on, we were transferred back to Missouri, and I was discharged, honorably discharged, in Leavenworth, Missouri, 1945 sometime. I was very fortunate because when I was discharged, I came back, I think it was on a Thursday. The day was on a Thursday. That Monday, I went back to where I used to work, and it was a canning factory. I went back and I talked to the personnel office, and they says, Mario, your job is waiting for you. So I stayed home 3 days and went back to work in the same job that I was doing before I left for the service. I did make that trip to Washington, and as I hit the different places, like I hit the Battle of the Bulge, I hit the landing in Normandy, and also the different units that we were in. It brought back a lot of memories, but it was pleasant memories because the memorial is beautiful. They did a beautiful job, and I was honored and pleased to be able to see it, you know. Very slightly. I do for certain things that I want to. There's some things that I like to remember, and some things that I don't want to remember that I saw. So it does bring back memories of certain items, certain days, and I'm glad to and honored to be able to participate in those ceremonies, you know. I would say, well, first of all, you got to be thankful if you can come back without any scratch and without any memories that are going to affect your health. If you can come back feeling like this, you got to be thankful that you were in, and it was an honor to serve your country, and also that you came back and you're living in a free country because of what you did. This is the European Theater of Operation with 2 bronze stars for different battles I was in. This is the Good Conduct Medal. This is the American Theater of Operation Medal. This is the medal I got from New York State. This is the Victory Medal after the war was over. And this is the French Legion of Honor that I got from the French government for participating in liberating France.
And this over here, this is
the 8th Infantry Unit patch, 8th Infantry Division that we wore when we got into European Theater of Operation.
Okay. Thank you very much for your service to our country, and thank you very much for participating in this project.
And thank you for service in our country, Dave. I know you're a veteran of the Vietnam War, and it's a pleasure to be able to be here with you.
Thank you. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you've enjoyed this program. It's been both an honor and a pleasure to help these vets tell their story, and the Bonita Springs Historical Society welcomes your comments. I'm Dave Grossi. Thank you.